The Mojave does not apologize for what it is. It bakes the asphalt until the horizon warps. It swallows sound. It turns chrome into mirrors that blind you if you look too long. And in July, it reduces every human being billionaire or broke, decorated or forgotten to something equally small. A figure standing in the heat, hoping the next mile holds water. Evelyn Carter's convoy appeared on Route 62 just after 11 in the morning. 3 black SUVs, tinted glass, satellite antennas on the roofs, tires that cost more than most people made in a month. They moved in tight formation, the way money always moves, purposeful. Self-enclosed. Immune to doubt. Evelyn sat in the middle vehicle, laptop open, a satellite call on hold while her project director, a thin man named Douglas Reed, stood over a topographical map spread across the center console. They were surveying the parcel, 47,000 acres of desert scrubland that Carter Energy Solutions had quietly acquired over the previous 18 months, destined to become the largest privately funded solar array on the continent, a $2.3 billion project, the kind of thing that would put her name on a building somewhere. Eventually, Evelyn was 36. She had been named to 3 consecutive Forbes lists. She had testified before the Senate Energy Committee. She had, on 2 separate occasions, been called a visionary by people whose opinion she respected. She had stopped needing other people's approval somewhere around her 28th birthday, and had not looked back since. She was not, by any clinical measure, cruel. But she was efficient. And in the calculus of efficiency, people who could not help you were approximately equal to obstacles. "There's a structure ahead," said the driver, a former state trooper named Glenn Marsh, who had worked for her for 4 years, and knew when to speak and when not to. Evelyn looked up. The structure was barely worth the word. A corrugated metal awning bolted to a cinder block wall. 3 walls in total, one side open to the road. It had once been a service station. The pumps were gone. Their concrete pads cracked and drifted over with sand. Someone had painted the word repairs in block letters on the side wall, in a color that used to be red. Parked under the awning was a pickup truck, a 1994 Ford F-250, dark green under a coat of sun-bleached dust. The hood was up. A man was leaning over the engine. He was tall, lean in the way that comes from work rather than a gym, wearing a faded gray t-shirt and canvas work pants. His forearms were dark from sun. He wore no hat. His hair was short and slightly overgrown, the kind of cut that happens when you stop going to barbers regularly but haven't let it go completely. He was somewhere in his mid-30s, though the desert made it hard to be precise. Beside the truck, in a folding chair set deliberately in the shade cast by the passenger door, sat a girl. She was 7 years old. She had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn jaw, though Evelyn could not have known that. She wore a yellow dress, slightly too big, and she was drawing something in a spiral-bound sketchbook balanced on her knees. Her feet didn't reach the ground. The convoy slowed without Evelyn instructing it to. Glenn had a habit of doing that. He saw things that mattered before she did, and adjusted accordingly. Evelyn watched the man and the child through the tinted window for a moment. She made the calculation quickly the way she always did, and filed them away. "What's the holdup?" she asked. "Vehicle check engine warning," said Glenn. "Standard protocol in extreme heat." 30 seconds. Evelyn closed her laptop. She stepped out of the SUV. The heat was immediate and specific, like opening a furnace door. She wore cream-colored linen trousers and a silk blouse the color of slate, wholly unsuitable for the environment. Her sunglasses were very good ones. She put them on and looked around the way you look at a location you're already planning to change. The man under the hood did not look up. The girl looked up immediately. She had a piece of charcoal in her right hand, and a smear of it on her left cheek. She watched Evelyn with open, uncomplicated curiosity, the kind of attention that adults learn to disguise. Evelyn looked back at her for a second, then away. "Does he work here?" she asked Glenn, who had stepped out behind her. "Looks like it," Glenn said. She walked toward the truck. "Excuse me." The man didn't respond for a moment. He was listening to the engine, or perhaps just giving himself time. Then he straightened slowly, unhurried, and looked at her. He had a ratchet in one hand and grease on 2 of his knuckles. He had green eyes a specific shade, pale and clear. The kind that made you feel briefly like you were being assessed, rather than seen. "Marcus Hale," he said, by way of greeting. Not a question. Just his name. Offered flat. Evelyn ignored the introduction. "We have a vehicle malfunction. We need someone to look at it." "Can you do that?" Marcus looked at the convoy. He looked at the 3 SUVs. He looked back at her. "I can look at it," he said. "Can't promise anything without checking it first, obviously." She said the word in the way people say it when they mean the opposite, when they mean that should go without saying. "And the fact that you said it tells me something about you." Marcus turned and looked at his daughter. She had gone back to drawing. "Lily," he said. "I know," she said, without looking up. She adjusted the sketchbook on her knees and kept working. He wiped his hands on a cloth hanging from his back pocket and walked toward the SUVs. Evelyn followed, pulling her phone out and returning to her paused call. The girl watched her father walk across the cracked concrete, then looked at the sky. A single hawk was circling high up, almost still, writing something invisible. She drew it into the corner of her page. The problem with the lead SUV was a coolant warning triggered by the temperature sensor, not unusual in 112-degree heat. Marcus walked around the vehicle, checked the reservoir, asked Glenn to pop the hood. He worked methodically. Not slowly, there was nothing lazy about it, but without theater. He checked what needed checking in the order it made sense to check it. Evelyn stood nearby. The phone call finished now, watching. Douglas Reed had gotten out of the second vehicle and was showing her something on a tablet, elevation data or drone footage or a financial model. She was listening to him and watching Marcus simultaneously. The way executives watch service workers. Present enough to notice a problem. Absent enough to deny real attention. "What's the actual timeline?" she asked Reed. "Groundbreaking is contingent on the variance approval. 60 to 90 days. Make it 45. Get Hartley's office on the phone." She glanced at Marcus. He was crouching now, looking up at something from below. "How long is this going to take?" she called across. "Checking the thermostat housing," he said, not looking up. "Could be a blocked sensor. Could be something else. I need a few minutes to do it right." "A few minutes," she repeated. Not quite a question. The tone was of someone filing a complaint they haven't quite decided to make yet. Her assistant, a young woman named Claire who did not deserve half the days she had, came around the side of the vehicle. "Miss Carter, the catering truck for the site visit is already at the staging area." "I know." Evelyn waved her off. She looked at Marcus again. "You know," she said, loud enough to carry, loud enough for the assembled staff to hear, "I've had this vehicle serviced by one of the best shops in Scottsdale, and you're saying a garage in the middle of nowhere is going to tell me something they missed?" A few of her team laughed softly, reflexively. The way you laugh when the person paying your salary says something arch. Marcus did not react. Glenn, who had worked for Evelyn long enough to read rooms, looked at the ground. "I'm not telling you anything yet," Marcus said evenly. "I'm looking." "Right." She tilted her head slightly. "Because that's what you do here. Look at things. In the desert." She glanced around at the broken pumps, the faded sign, the cinder block walls. Big career. The laughter was a little less certain this time. Softer. Marcus straightened. He looked at her directly, not with anger, not with hurt, not with anything that could be read as a request for sympathy. "Sensor housing's cracked," he said. "You can keep driving it. But in this heat, the actual coolant temperature is going to keep climbing without the warning light telling you. You'd be running blind." She stared at him. "Can you fix it?" "I have the part. Takes about 20 minutes. "Fine. Do it." He turned back to the vehicle. Across the lot, Lily had set down her sketchbook. She was watching now, quietly, her hands folded in her lap. When her father walked past her to get the part from his toolbox, she said, very softly, "Do we need to help them, Ba?" He stopped. He looked at her for a moment, the kind of look that takes in the whole child, not just the face. "They'll choose how they see themselves," he said. "And how they see us." She nodded slowly, as if she were filing this away for later. He went to get the part. Evelyn was back on her phone. She was issuing instructions. She was composing an email with her left thumb while talking with her right hand. She was in every visible sense unbothered. But when her eyes moved back to the cracked concrete and the girl in the folding chair, something shifted in them, almost imperceptibly, the way a light changes when a cloud moves. She looked away. The wall of dust appeared on the southern horizon at 12:17 p.m. Marcus saw it first. He had lived in the Mojave for 3 years by then. He had learned to read it the way he'd once learned to read terrain in places where getting the reading wrong had more permanent consequences. The wall was brown-orange, and it moved fast, faster than it looked, and it was going to be here in under 8 minutes. He finished tightening the sensor housing bolt, set his wrench down. "Dust storm incoming," he said, to no one in particular, loudly enough for everyone. Evelyn's assistant looked up. Douglas Reed turned. Glenn stepped away from the vehicle he'd been leaning against and looked south. "Haboob?" Glenn said. "Yes." Marcus was already moving. He walked to Lily. "Come on," he said, holding out his hand. She took it without hesitation. She picked up her sketchbook with her other hand. She did not run, she didn't need to. Her father set the pace, but she moved with a certainty that suggested she had been through this kind of thing before. Marcus pulled the driver's side door open and settled Lily into the rear seat, then reached behind the bench and pulled out a canvas duffel. From inside, he took a large flat piece of coated nylon, originally a vehicle cover, modified now with grommets and tie cords, and spent 45 efficient seconds securing it to the awning frame with bungee hooks, creating an additional windbreak on the open side of the structure. "Everybody needs to get in or under cover right now," he said, over his shoulder. "You've got maybe 5 minutes." Evelyn's team began moving. Claire started herding people toward the SUVs. Glenn was already back in the lead vehicle. Evelyn stood still. She was watching Marcus work. He was tying a second cord to the last grommet, testing the tension, checking the anchor point. The movements were absolutely certain. No wasted motion, no recalculation, no hesitation. This was not someone improvising. This was someone drawing on a deep, specific reservoir of practiced competence. "Miss Carter," said Reed, appearing at her elbow. "We should get in." In a second, she didn't move. The wind arrived first. Before the wall. It came low and cold for a place this hot. The pressure drop making the air briefly feel almost bearable. Then the light went yellow-brown, and the first gusts hit hard enough to stagger anyone who wasn't braced. Evelyn put her arm up to shield her face. Marcus had already guided Lily to the back of the structure, behind the vehicle, where the wall and the truck created a corner of real protection. He had given her his jacket, he'd retrieved it from the cab without making an announcement about it, and she sat with it over her head like a small tent, sketchbook pressed against her chest. The wall hit. It was not dramatic in the movies and explosions sense. It was total. The light went nearly dark. The sound was a sustained roar that was both loud and strangely uniform, like static at enormous volume. The air became particulate, you stopped breathing through your mouth. You covered your eyes. Most of Evelyn's team were in the vehicles, but Douglas Reed's tablet had been caught by the initial gust and skittered across the concrete. And he'd chased it reflexively. And now he was caught in the open, disoriented, shielding his face with both arms, turning in the wrong direction. Marcus was out of the shelter in 3 steps. He reached Reed in 5. He put a hand on the man's shoulder, turned him by force, not rough, but not gentle either, and walked him into the lee of the truck. Reed crouched there, coughing, disoriented. Then Marcus looked across the lot. Evelyn Carter was still standing in approximately the same spot. She had turned her back to the wind. Her hair was loose and lateral. She had one arm over her face. She was not moving, which suggested either stubbornness or shock. And Marcus had worked with enough people in enough compressed situations to know that it was probably both, layered over each other. He went to her. He didn't say anything. He put one hand on her upper arm and walked. She resisted for half a second, pure instinct, and then she moved, because in this particular negotiation the storm had already decided who was in charge. He got her to the shelter of the structure. She stood against the cinder block wall, breathing carefully. One hand pressed flat against the concrete, as if verifying it was real. Marcus went back to Lily. Evelyn watched him settle beside his daughter. He put his arm around her. The jacket made her look very small. She leaned against him without any of the performed reluctance that children sometimes develop by 7. She just leaned, completely. In the simple way of total trust. The roar continued. Evelyn stood against the wall. She said nothing. 14 feet away, a 7-year-old girl opened her sketchbook to a fresh page, and using her charcoal and her father's arm as a brace, began drawing something. The storm lasted 31 minutes. When the light returned, it was the particular ochre gold of post-Haboob afternoon, everything coated, everything muffled, the sky still hazy at the edges. Reed's tablet was cracked but functional. 2 of the SUVs had minor paint scoring. The satellite antennas needed realignment. These were, in the scope of a $2 billion project, irrelevant problems. What was not irrelevant was that every communication device in Evelyn's convoy had lost signal. The satellite uplinks were down. Cell service in this corridor was unreliable even before the storm. Now the atmospheric interference put it at 0. She had a site foreman waiting at the staging point 12 miles north. She had contractors, engineers, a compliance attorney. She had a schedule, and she had no way to reach any of it. Evelyn stood by the lead SUV with Reed and Claire, running through options that were not options. Glenn had walked the lot perimeter. Nothing nearby, he reported. Next town with a tower is 30 miles. Evelyn looked across at Marcus. He had pulled Lily's folding chair out from the shelter and set it back in the shade of the truck. She was drawing again. He was at the engine of the F-250, doing something with a socket wrench. Claire noticed something. Is that military? She said quietly, looking at the truck. Reed looked. On the rear window of the cab, half obscured by dust, was a decal, not a bumper sticker but a small, precisely applied transfer. A specific unit insignia, the kind that comes from the unit itself. Not a retail store. Could be old, Reed said. The tool organization, Claire said. Look at how his tools are laid out. Reed looked. He didn't see what she saw, he wasn't looking for it, but Evelyn had turned. And she was looking, and she had spent enough time around military contractors in her infrastructure dealings to understand what organized equipment at that level of systematization indicated. It indicated training, specific, sustained, professional training. She looked at the cab interior through the open driver's side window. There was, mounted low on the dash, a device she didn't recognize. Not a phone mount. Not a GPS. A radio unit of some kind, compact, matte black, the kind of hardware that you don't buy at a truck accessories shop. She looked at the child. Lily had looked up from her sketchbook without any apparent trigger, as if she had felt the attention. Your dad, Evelyn said, before she'd quite decided to speak. What did he do? Before this? Lily considered the question with genuine seriousness. The way children do when they've been asked something they know is real. He flew things, she said, a long time ago. He flew very high. She paused. He said, the stars looked different up there. Evelyn looked at Marcus. He had not appeared to hear. He was still at the engine. His movements were calm and completely focused. The way someone is calm when they have decided not to perform calm, when it isn't a decision at all but simply a state. She walked back to Glenn. The device on his dash, she said quietly. What do you make of it? Glenn looked. He had done 8 years in the Air Force, before private security. He took a slow breath. Satcom transceiver, he said. Modified. That's not commercial. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Why would he have that? Glenn didn't answer immediately. Then, people who have them usually have them for reasons that don't expire when the service does. The afternoon light was very still. The haze had softened everything. Even the sound of Marcus's wrench on metal was muted, as if the desert had turned down its own volume. Evelyn looked at her convoy, at her staff, at the dead satellite links. She was a woman who had built her life on anticipating variables. She realized she had missed one. She heard it before she saw it. The rotors were low and wide-spaced, at first a vibration more than a sound, something felt in the sternum before it registered in the ears. Then the pitch shifted, descended, grew specific. The kind of specific that meant something very large was very close. It came in from the northeast, below the ridgeline, following the highway. A UH-60 Blackhawk in non-standard paint flat gray, no unit markings visible from this distance. It was not in distress. It was not searching. It was vectoring, moving with the precision of an aircraft that knows exactly where it is going. Everyone in the lot had stopped moving. The Black Hawk cleared the last rock formation and dropped altitude rapidly. And when it leveled off, it was pointing directly at the service station. It slowed. The rotor wash hit before it landed, lifting everything: light papers, dust, the tarp Marcus had rigged to the awning. Lily pressed both hands flat on her sketchbook. It sat down in the open desert 50 yards off the road, behind the station. A textbook landing. Dust rolled in a perfect expanding ring. The rotors were still turning when the side door opened. 4 men stepped out, moving in a way that was not hurried but was also not casual. The walk of people who had been trained to project calm in situations that weren't. They were in civilian clothes, pants, boots, collared shirts, but the clothes were wrong for civilians. Too functional, too undecorated. The man in front was compact and dark-haired, with the specific kind of face that has been outside for a very long time. He scanned the lot as he walked, a single sweep that took in everything and settled, without apparent conclusion, on Marcus. Marcus had come around from the engine. He was wiping his hands on the cloth again. He stood in the open, in the sun, watching them come. The man in front said his name, not his first name. His rank. Evelyn Carter was 30 feet away, and she heard it clearly. It was not the rank of someone who fixes trucks. Marcus said, calmly, "I'm not active. We know." The man stopped walking. "Sir, we wouldn't be here if we had another option. The signal. Your SATCOM pinged the network. The storm triggered the beacon protocol. We're the closest asset." Marcus was quiet. He looked back at the structure. At Lily, who had set down her charcoal and was watching the helicopter with enormous eyes, not frightened. Evelyn noted, "Not at all frightened. Familiar." "She's all right," Marcus said. "Yes, sir. But there's a secondary reason we came." The man looked briefly at the convoy at Evelyn. Back to Marcus. "There's a situation at the site. We picked it up on thermal 40 minutes ago. We thought you should know." Marcus looked at Evelyn. She was standing very still. She had, in the previous 30 seconds, restructured a fairly significant amount of her understanding of the afternoon. "What site?" she said. The man with the dark hair looked at her. His expression was professionally neutral. "Your project, ma'am. Northern Parcel. We were routing over it when we saw it." He paused. "You might want to hear this." Evelyn looked at Marcus. Something crossed his face, not pride, not satisfaction, nothing that looked like "I told you so." It was closer to a kind of deliberate emptiness, a man choosing not to fill a space that he could fill. "All right," Marcus said. And that was all he said. He turned and walked toward the structure. He stopped at Lily's chair and crouched down to her level. "I need to help them with something," he said. Lily looked at the Black Hawk, then at her father. "Okay," she said. "You stay right here, in the shade. You've got your water?" She held up the water bottle clipped to the chair arm. She had already had this conversation before, Evelyn understood. Not the specific conversation, but the shape of it. The rhythm of it. The daughter who knew that her father sometimes had to go toward things other people moved away from, and had made her peace with it. Marcus stood. He looked at the man who had called him by his rank. "Tell me what you saw," he said. He had flown HH-60G Pavehawks for the 66th Rescue Squadron. This was not information Evelyn extracted during the crisis. It was information that surfaced later, in fragments, the way the real shape of a person surfaces, never all at once, never in a presentation, always through the accumulated texture of small things. What she understood in the immediate term was narrower and sufficient. He had been trained to fly into places where other aircraft couldn't, to extract people who had no other way out. He had been trained in combat medicine, in emergency systems, in the peculiar geometry of crisis that involves too little time and too much information, and the absolute requirement that you do not let either of those facts make the decision for you. He had left the Air Force 4 years ago, in October, 8 weeks after his wife died. Her name had been Anna. She had been a pediatric nurse. She had died of an aneurysm, sudden and without warning. On a Tuesday morning in the kitchen of their house in Tucson, Marcus had been on a training rotation in Nevada. He had driven through the night to get home. He had taken an honorable discharge 7 weeks later. No ceremony, no fuss. He had sold the house in Tucson, taken Lily, and moved to the desert he already knew. He had bought the service station lot for $12,000 in cash. He had fixed the structure himself. He fixed things, now. Cars, generators, water pumps. He charged fair prices, and he did the work correctly, and when he was done he went home to his daughter and made dinner and helped with homework and read to her before bed from whatever book they were working through. They were currently on the Phantom toll booth, which Lily found philosophically interesting, and Marcus found unexpectedly moving. He did not explain any of this to Evelyn. What she knew from observation, and from things Lily said without meaning to say them. Later, while the situation on the northern parcel was being assessed, Lily came to stand near Evelyn. She was carrying her sketchbook, the charcoal tucked behind one ear. "You're the one who owns the land," Lily said. "Yes," Evelyn said. Lily considered this. "Ba says land doesn't belong to people. He says people belong to land, for a while." She looked out at the desert. "He says the desert was here before the highway, and it'll be here after." Evelyn was quiet. "Do you think he's right?" Lily asked. It was a genuine question. She wasn't performing anything. She was asking because she wanted to know what someone with a different perspective thought, and this struck Evelyn, who had been in rooms full of adults who never did this, as a fairly extraordinary thing. "I think he might be," Evelyn said. Lily nodded slowly. "He's usually right about the desert," she said. "But he was wrong about the truck. He said the engine would last another 20,000 miles, but the block cracked last month." She said it with the faint, fond exasperation of someone who has accepted that the people they love are not infallible. Evelyn almost smiled. She didn't, quite, but almost. What the thermal imaging had picked up was real. One of the pilot survey units installed on the northern parcel, a prototype monitoring station built as part of the project's pre-construction environmental assessment, had experienced a cascading failure. The unit's battery array had begun thermal runaway. In 112-degree ambient heat, with a compromised ventilation seal, the array was generating temperatures that were approaching ignition threshold for the nearby lithium backup cells. It wasn't going to be a catastrophe. Not on its own, but the failure was accelerating, and the parcel's dry scrubland was tinder in July, and the prevailing wind was northwest, which meant the burn path, if it ignited, would run directly toward a ridge that contained two of the project's main transformer housings, and, beyond that, a BLM wilderness buffer. A wildfire in that area, during permitting, would end the project. More than that, it would end the watershed's 10-year recovery effort. It would kill things that took longer to replace than money could estimate. Evelyn's project foreman, Jason Webb, had been trying to reach her for 90 minutes. He had no way to reach the Black Hawk team directly. He had, eventually, reached a county emergency number, who had reached an Air Force liaison, who had flagged a nearby asset, which was why 4 men in civilian clothes had landed in the desert behind a defunct service station. Marcus listened to the briefing in full without interrupting. He asked 3 questions. He got his answers. Then he looked at the problem the way he had looked at everything else that afternoon, not with urgency, not with the performed calm of someone suppressing urgency, but with a specific and genuine focus, the kind that comes from having been in situations where panic was not just unhelpful but lethal. "What's the isolation distance on the array?" he asked. The man who had flown with him, the one named Porter, looked at the specs on his tablet. 3 meters. Interlocked thermal switch. So if we get cooling on the primary cells before the secondary threshold, the switch triggers and arrests the cascade. Right. What coolant do you have on the aircraft? A pause. Then, dry chemical and CO2. We have a ground fire kit. CO2 won't do it alone in that ambient temperature. You'd need sustained application. Marcus looked at the layout on the tablet. What's the clearance? Wide enough to land. Not for me. I'm not active. He said it plainly. Not as an excuse, as a fact. "We know," said Porter. "We're not asking you to fly. We're asking you to tell us what to do when we get there." Marcus looked at the tablet a moment longer. Then he looked at Evelyn. "Your foreman," he said. "Is he good?" She had been listening to all of this. She had been standing at the edge of the conversation, and she had not interrupted once, which was, she recognized this only later, perhaps the most unusual behavior she had exhibited all day. "Jason is very good," she said. "He'll need to cut the manual bypass on panel 3 before the cooling application. If he trips it in the wrong sequence, the switch locks out." He turned back to Porter. "I can talk him through it by radio." Porter looked at the SATCOM unit on Marcus's truck dash. "That's active?" he asked. "It's always active," Marcus said. He went to get it. Evelyn stood in the full sun, her cream linen trousers coated with dust to the knee, her silk blouse limp with heat. Her assistant had stopped hovering. Her project director had stopped offering analysis. She watched Marcus pull the transceiver from its mount and carry it to the shade of the awning, where he sat on a tire iron case and began running a diagnostic check with the same economy of motion he applied to everything. She walked over. "I want to help," she said. "Tell me what to do." He looked up at her. There was a long moment. She held it. "Do you know your foreman's radio frequency?" he asked. "No. But I can get it in 30 seconds. Get it?" She got it. It took 1 hour and 22 minutes to resolve the situation on the northern parcel. Marcus talked Jason Webb through the bypass sequence in exactly the calm, precise language of someone who has given critical instructions to people in high-stress situations and knows that clarity is not the same as simplicity, that sometimes the most useful thing you can do is slow down, repeat, confirm. The cooling application worked. The thermal runaway arrested at 78% escalation, well below ignition threshold. The monitoring station was a write-off, but the land was fine. The transformers were fine. The scrubland was fine. Evelyn listened to every exchange. She stood 6 feet from Marcus for the full duration, close enough to hear both ends of the radio, and she did not move. She handed him water when she noticed his was empty. He took it without looking up, drank half, set it down. When the confirmation came through that the situation was contained, Porter shook Marcus's hand. The Black Hawk team went back to their aircraft in the same unhurried way they'd arrived. Marcus set the transceiver down on the tire iron case and was quiet for a moment. Evelyn stood across from him. The desert was doing the thing it does in late afternoon, going gold, going still, the heat beginning to release by degrees, the shadows lengthening towards something that looked, from a distance, like peace. "Mr. Hale," she said. He looked at her. "I was dismissive of you this morning." She paused. "I was dismissive of both of you. And I said things." She stopped. She started again. "The things I said were unkind, and they were wrong. Not just factually wrong. Wrong in the way I meant them, the way I intended them." She was not a woman who apologized often. You could hear it not in any hesitation, but in the precise, careful way she was constructing the sentences, as if building something she wanted to be sturdy. "I saw a man fixing a truck in the desert, and I decided that was all there was to see," she said. "And that's not a mistake about you specifically. It's a habit. It's a way I've learned to move through rooms. I'm fast and I'm decisive, and those have been useful things for me, but they have a cost that I—" She stopped again. "I hadn't totaled that cost before today." Marcus said nothing. She waited. "My daughter is watching," he said finally. Evelyn looked. Lily was sitting in her chair 20 feet away, sketchbook in her lap, eyes on them both. Completely still, completely attentive. "I know," Evelyn said. "Everything I do out here is for her to see," Marcus said. "The way I work. The way I talk to people. The way I stay quiet, when staying quiet is harder." He looked at his hands, the grease that hadn't washed off completely, the calluses on his right palm. "I can't teach her what she needs to know if I'm showing her a version of myself that doesn't exist." The sentence settled in the air between them. Evelyn felt something that she would have trouble naming later, not guilt. Exactly, though that was part of it. Something closer to the sensation of having looked at a landscape for a long time while thinking it was one thing, and then understanding, abruptly, that it was something else, not smaller, larger. What does she need to know? Evelyn asked. She asked it sincerely. Marcus thought for a moment. That you don't have to be loud to be strong, he said. That the people who look like they have nothing are often the ones who understand what things are worth. He looked out at the desert, and that the desert doesn't care about your balance sheet. Lily had gone back to drawing. Evelyn's team had reassembled around the convoy. Systems were coming back online, the atmospheric interference clearing as the afternoon shifted. Glenn had confirmed contact with the staging area, the project, the schedule, the contractors. All of it resumed its forward motion, because it was a $2 billion project, and it didn't stop for one afternoon in the desert. Evelyn found herself, for the first time in a professional context, she could remember, not entirely interested in the forward motion. She found Douglas Reed and told him to handle the staging area contact. She told Claire to push the contractor call by 3 hours. She did these things without explanation or apology, which was the way she always did things. But the texture of it was different, more deliberate. She went back to where Marcus was reassembling the tools he'd used on her vehicle. "I want to offer you something," she said. He kept working. He didn't look up. Not dismissively, he was just finishing what he was doing first. "Okay," he said. "I have a facilities management and emergency systems operation attached to the project. The lead role is open. It's a real role, not symbolic, not ceremonial. The person in that position would have meaningful authority over the site safety infrastructure and the emergency protocol for a 400-person operation." She paused. "The salary is significant. The work would suit your—" She searched for the right word and chose the accurate one instead of the impressive one. "Your capabilities." Marcus set a wrench down. He was quiet for a long moment. "I appreciate it," he said. "But that's not what I'm doing right now. I know it would mean relocating. I know the timing. It's not the timing." He looked at Lily. "She's in school 8 miles from here. She has a teacher she likes. She has a friend named Rosie who lives down the road and comes over on Saturdays." He picked up the wrench again, placed it in its case. "She grew up knowing how to read a storm. She knows how to fix a water pump. She knows what the desert looks like before rain." He closed the case latches, one click, then the other. "That's a curriculum. I'm not interrupting it." Evelyn was quiet. "She's 7, she said. Not an argument. More like an observation she was making out loud. "She's 7, he agreed. "And she's already watching how decisions get made. What they cost. What they're actually for." He looked at Evelyn directly. "I left a career that mattered to me because she needed me here. And she still needs me here. That's not a problem I'm solving. It's just true." There was a pause. "Is there anything you would accept?" Evelyn asked. The question surprised her slightly, even as she was asking it. She had not planned it. It came from somewhere other than strategy. Marcus thought. "The survey station that failed today," he said. "The monitoring equipment. I know what failed and why. The design has a ventilation flaw that'll cause the same problem on all 5 units by next summer." He met her eyes. "I can write you a 2-page assessment. You can give it to your engineers and they can fix it. It would take them a week, not a month, because I'll tell them exactly what to look for." Evelyn blinked. "That's what you want? To write a report?" "I want your engineers to have the information they need to not burn this desert down next July," he said. "That's what matters." She stared at him. "I'll have Reed set up a call with the engineering lead this week," she said. "No call necessary. I'll write the 2 pages and send them. You get me an email address." She gave him her direct email. He wrote it on his hand. The convoy left at 4:47 p.m. 3 black SUVs, moving in their tight formation, back onto Route 62 heading north. The tires raised no dust this time. The storm had wetted the road surface down to the packed layer, and the fine grit hadn't risen back yet. The vehicles were quieter than usual, or perhaps it was just that everyone in them was quieter. Evelyn sat in the middle vehicle. Her laptop was open, but the screen was dark. Reed said something about the timeline for the variants. She said something back. She didn't remember what. She was thinking about a 7-year-old girl drawing at the edge of a storm, drawing a hawk or a truck or something she couldn't make out. drawing with total absorption and no apparent need for anyone to notice. She was thinking about what Marcus had said, "I'm not interrupting it," and the specific weight of a person who knows exactly what they're doing and why, and has nothing to prove because of it. She was thinking about the way he'd walked into the haboob to get Reed, how he hadn't hesitated, hadn't announced himself, hadn't looked to see if anyone was watching. The way he'd done it the same way he did everything else. Because it was what the situation required. And he was the person present who could do it. She was thinking about her own convoy, with its satellite uplinks and its $800 a day staff and its billion-dollar ambitions, and how completely helpless it had been for 90 minutes in the middle of the desert, and how the solution had lived on the other side of the contempt she'd chosen. She had built her entire professional life on the premise that competence announced itself. That it wore the right clothes, drove the right car, occupied the right offices, that it moved in formation, like her convoy, self-enclosed and certain. She had organized a career around this premise so thoroughly that she had stopped examining it the way you stop examining air, because you cannot imagine it not being there. The premise was wrong. Or rather, it was narrow in a way she now understood to be a kind of blindness, not malicious, not calculated, but the ordinary, acquired blindness of someone who had only ever needed to look in one direction. Marcus Hale had never looked in her direction at all. Not because he couldn't, she understood that now, understood it in the precise, uncomfortable way of someone who has seen a mirror held at an unexpected angle, but because her direction had simply not been where the real things were. The real things were a coolant sensor in 112-degree heat. A child sitting in the shade with a sketchbook. A thermal cascade on a northern parcel, a bypass sequence that needed to be done in the right order, or not at all. The real things were patient. They didn't care who you were. They only cared whether you could see them clearly enough to do something useful. The sun was lower now. The desert had shifted into its evening register, the light going from punishing to beautiful, with the same indifference it applied to everything else. Back at the service station, Marcus washed his hands at the outdoor spigot. The water was warm, but it moved the grease. Lily had carried both chairs inside the structure, their version of closing up, and was sitting on the truck's tailgate with her sketchbook, using the last good light. "Did you like her?" she asked, without looking up. Marcus dried his hands on a clean cloth. "I don't know her," he said. "You helped her, though." "Yes. Even after she was mean." He considered this. He didn't talk down to her. He never had. "People can be mean because they're scared," he said. "Or because they learned that being mean was the same as being powerful. That's a thing someone teaches you, usually by accident." He leaned against the tailgate. "Doesn't mean the meanness was right, but it means something about where it came from." Lily drew a line in her sketchbook. Then another. "Bah," she said. "Yeah. Were you ever scared today?" He thought about it. "For a minute," he said. "When the storm was coming and I counted the seconds wrong." He paused. "I thought we had more time than we did." She nodded gravely. "I wasn't scared," she said. "Because you were there." He was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. "Come on," he said eventually. "Let's get dinner started." She closed the sketchbook. She hopped off the tailgate, feet hitting the concrete with a flat smack. "Can I show you something first?" He looked. She opened the sketchbook to the last page she'd been working on. She had drawn two vehicles. On the left, a pickup truck, clearly the F-250. Identifiable by the specific flatness of the hood and the slope of the cab. On the right, a helicopter. A Black Hawk, its rotors extended, its lines simplified to the essentials that a 7-year-old's hand could carry. And between them, standing in a space that was neither defined as inside nor outside, neither between the machines nor separate from them, two figures. One tall, one small. The small figure had one hand extended upward, reaching. The tall figure had its hand extended down. They were holding each other's hands, not looking at each other, both looking forward, at something outside the frame of the drawing. Marcus looked at it for a long time. "That's good, Lily," he said. "I know," she said, with the serene confidence of someone who has learned that honest self-assessment is different from arrogance. "Ba taught me that." He didn't say anything. He put his arm around her shoulders, briefly, and then they went inside. The desert took the last of the light slowly, the way it does when it has all the time in the world. In the morning, the dust would have settled. The scrubland on the northern parcel would be undamaged. The dry brush still standing. The land still its own continuous self regardless of what was planned for it. The monitoring stations would need their assessments. The project would continue. And on a desk in a glass-walled office in Phoenix, Evelyn Carter would read, in 2 precise and quietly devastating pages, exactly what had gone wrong with her monitoring equipment and exactly how to fix it, written in a hand that had fixed things in darkness and altitude, and places where margin for error was measured in seconds by a man who had chosen, with full knowledge of what he was leaving behind, to fix things in the desert instead. She would read it twice. Then she would send it to her engineering lead and write, in the subject line, only this. Fix all 5 units before next summer. This is not optional. And below that, she would add one more line, not to the engineering lead, but to the man who had written the report, in a separate email. Thank you. I'm still working on seeing better. I think that's supposed to be ongoing. She sent it at 6:14 a.m., before her assistant arrived, before her calendar filled, before the day began its familiar forward motion. She did not wait for a reply. She didn't need one. The reply would come, or it wouldn't, on its own time, and its own terms, like the desert, like the storm, like everything that was real, and did not apologize for what it was. Out on Route 62, the morning light came level and clean across the flats, catching the windshield of a dark green pickup truck rolling slowly north toward town. In the passenger seat, a girl with charcoal-smudged fingers held a sketchbook open on her lap. She was drawing something new. From this distance, you couldn't tell what it was yet. From this distance, it was just a beginning. But beginnings, in the desert, are never small. They are just quiet. Everything that grows here learned patience. First the creosote, the Joshua tree, the hawk that circles for an hour before it moves. It all starts below the surface, in the dark, before anyone is looking. That is the desert's oldest lesson. It does not offer it twice, and it does not wait for you to be ready to receive it. It simply holds still, in the heat and the silence and the long gold light of late afternoon, until you finally stop moving fast enough to see what has been there the whole time.